Good afternoon. It's such a delight to see all of you here today for our 2025 Nasher Prize Laureate Lecture. Yes, thank you. For those of you who have followed the Nasher Prize, this program is an integral part of the celebration, allowing the artists to speak directly to a public audience and sharing insight on their practice. And today, we're in for a treat. A conversation between 2025 Nasher Prize laureate Otobong Nkanga and her good friend and ours, artist Rick Lowe. Yay! Before I introduce our speakers, let me first thank some of the generous people who have made the Nasher Prize possible. Thank you first to the National Endowment for the Arts and Texas Commission on the Arts for their support of the Laureate exhibition. And if you have not yet experienced the work Otobong made in our gallery, I urge you to do so after the conversation. Great thanks also go to our leading underwriters, Nancy A. Nasher and David J. Hemesegger, the Eugene McDermott Foundation, Frost Bank, Cindy and Howard Rachofsky, Vaughn O. Vennerberg II, the Bowden Family Foundation, John W. Dayton, Jennifer and John Eagle, Arlene Ford and Christopher Reynolds, Gagosian, Green Family Art Foundation, Ambassador Ron Kirk and Matrice Ellis Kirk, Listen Gallery, Cynthia and Forrest Miller, Lucino Pena and Lee Cobb, and Dee Dee Rose. Today's laureate lecture and the numerous Nasher Prize educational programs would not be possible without our education and community program sponsors, the Donna M. Wilhelm Family Fund, Joanne Leonard Casulo and the Dorothy L. Leonard Foundation, and Patricia J. Villarreal and Thomas S. Leatherbury. Among the many programs made possible by these contributions is the Nasher Prize Graduate Symposium, which in 2024 invited graduate students to present papers on the work of Otobong Nkanga. Directly after this conversation, we will unveil the publication of a compendium of those essays with some of the authors in attendance. I invite you all to join us upstairs to enjoy a glass of champagne and celebrate their accomplishments. Now, on to the program at hand. Our 2025 Nasher Prize laureate, Otobong Nkanga, was born in Kano, Nigeria, studied in Paris, Lagos, and Amsterdam, and currently lives in Antwerp, Belgium. Over the past 20 years, she has achieved an impressive and extensive list of exhibitions, accomplishments, and accolades, a list of which may be found on our website through the QR code which you hopefully can see on the screen here. These feature inclusion in major international surveys such as Documenta in 2017, biennials in Sharjah, Havana, and Venice, all in 2019, and the Busan Biennial in 2022. Just since announcing her as our Nasher Prize laureate in the fall of 2023, she's been in over 25 exhibitions across the globe, with solo exhibitions at IVAM Centro Julio González in Valencia, Spain, at Listen Gallery in London, and at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, which remains on view through July 27th. In addition to receiving the Nasher Prize tomorrow night, this past February, she received the 2025 Zeitz Mocha Honorary Award for Artistic Excellence in Cape Town, South Africa. Many of you here may be familiar with Rick Lowe, who has come to us from his home in Houston, Texas. His biography is similarly expansive, with exhibitions and projects around the world, including Documenta as well in 2017, and a remarkable list of honors and accolades, notably the MacArthur Fellowship in 2014. He has worked both inside and outside of art world institutions by participating in exhibitions and developing community-based art projects. In 1993, Rick founded Project Row Houses, an arts and cultural community located in a historically significant and culturally charged neighborhood in Houston. Since then, he has participated in other socially impactful collaborations in Houston, Los Angeles, Seattle, New Orleans, Charleston, South Carolina, Athens, Greece, Anyang, Korea, and here in Dallas for the Nasher Sculpture Center's 10th anniversary exhibition, Nasher Exchange. In 2002, he invited Otobong Nkanga to Project Row Houses, where she held her first exhibition in the United States as part of PhotoFest. It is my honor to welcome to the stage Rick Lowe and Otobong Nkanga.
I'll just follow. Thank you.
That's the way it
Thank That was a good start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are we on?
I don't know.
Are we on? Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, I will kick it off a little bit here. To just bring us back to 2002, what Jet mentioned. We were contacted by this organization in Houston called PhotoFest, who would bring in international artists to participate, and they would try to find places within the community for them to work and to show their work. And they contacted me and they said, well, we have this great Nigerian artist that's living in Paris, and she's, great photographer. And so it's like, okay, so we're like, yeah, let's bring her in. This woman showed up. I mean, she just told me something that I forgot about. But she said, I used to call her the squirrel. I mean, her energy level was just like, I was like, oh my God, this woman. But I knew from that point that this would be somebody that I would know the rest of my life, and that I would be friends with, colleagues with, and enjoy, watching her work grow as I kind of continued my path. But when she did her piece at Row Houses, it was a bit
strange.
It had a strange component to it. She came to us as a photographer, and you did show photographs.
Yes, I did.
And there were photographs, but there was poetry, there was performance, sculpture. I mean, it was like this whole range of things, and so, and it's so interesting to have seen that in your first encounter with me, and seeing now over the years how you've done it in so many different places. But the shocking thing was, when you walked into the house, you would see these photographs with a poem connecting them. You go all the way around, and at the end of the house, it's kind of a little enclave there. And you go around, most people just go around and they're reading the poem, but then if they took a step back, they just scream out. Because she had us, there was an image of it earlier, but she had us to cut a hole in the floor, dig a hole, and create a box in which we put plexi over it, and she would go into that box and just sit there and do stuff. You were actually... And people would they'd go like, what, oh my God, what, and looked at her like, what's she doing? And she never gave it away. She never looked, she just ignored. It's amazing.
Yeah, I think at that point in time in my life, that was like 2002. And I had a big problem because most people could never pronounce my name. And they could never, oh, what's your name? And people always forgot who you were. You'll be in an exhibition and people totally forget that, and say, oh, what's your name again? Oh, I can't pronounce that. That's too hard. And then I was really thinking about changing my name, seriously. And I thought maybe the best name I could take would be a name that is kind of quite common, mixed. So I decided on a kind of Irish name, McBride. And And the first name will be Jennifer. So, you know, you wouldn't know where I come from. You think I'm Irish. You think whatever. So I was using the Project Row houses as a test ground for this possibility. And so I said, okay, let's confuse things and make this work called, you know, we'll call it the acquisition of Jennifer McBride. So that means that Jennifer McBride is not an artist really, but she is. But she's also a collector, so she acquired this because she has to also have prominence. So it was quite interesting to be able to try that out. So after that exhibition, I decided, no, I'll keep my name. Forget it. People will either have to learn how to pronounce my name or, you know, too bad, that's it. But it was really an incredible experience because when I arrived at Project Row Houses, I wasn't expecting that. I was invited with Rick, and it was with Wendy Watrous. Yeah. And I was really thinking, wow, you know, this is photography. I never considered myself as a photographer. But even though at that time I was making a lot of photography. But what the interesting thing of coming to Houston, I mean, this was one of my first international shows after Bamako, and I'd never been, you know, I'd been to America an earlier time where I took the Greyhound from New York to Atlanta, and I almost died and came back again to life. But Houston was a soft landing. The weather was warm. And then I met Rick, and I was like, God, he feels like I've known him for, you know, I told you that I've known you forever. Like almost you're beyond just, you know, you didn't need to introduce yourself. We kind of just easily talked, and we knew exactly what we're talking about. But the amazing thing was that Rick allowed me to enter the board meetings. He would take me to his board meetings.
I allowed. Right.
Allowed, yeah, because you might not.
I think you at the Nasher, you know what it means when she said, "Oh, you allowed me to."
So it was amazing, and you'd go to someone's house that, you know, sprawling gardens, and you'd listen to what they're saying. So this is 2002, hearing how people are talking about how to build something, how to support, how to, especially with the Project Row houses that had the buildings for the young women that have kids. And so there was a social aspect in it. The artists were part of that to communicate with the young ladies. Then there was the educational team, and then you see kids come at 4 o'clock after school for lessons. And for me, that was one of the most important things that changed the way I looked at artworks. I was used to seeing works in museums like Louvre, you know, Stedelijk in Amsterdam, because then I moved to Amsterdam. All those different containers for artwork. And here, all of a sudden, the container has been broken. It's been totally expanded. And I remember one of the conversations we had, and you didn't have a washing machine. Mm-hmm. And I was like, Rick, where's your washing machine? Because I stayed with him. Like, and Rick is like, oh, no, I'm not going to have all that. There's a lady in the neighborhood in 3rd Ward, and if I do not bring my clothes to her, her shop will, you know, it will be over and done with, because we already started seeing the sign of gentrification that was happening slowly. And so that, till today, I still remember that the impact of the little impacts that you do in a society really helps to change things. And you were one of the first persons to make me realize that the impacts, what you're doing, you know, playing domino with your friends, keeping that relationship, being aware that every gesture you make in that society completely changes the way things will shape in the future. I remember seeing a lady in a red dress, and you was like, oh, she's just come out of wherever she was in, and I was like, she's looking great. It's like, yeah, but the neighborhood is also infested with different things in which you're countering through this project you're doing. So I was very much touched by that, and I remember saying to myself, I would want to do a project in the future that would actually touch the community in a very impactful way. And it's taken years, because you also think about how do you sustain these things. And so that was one of the things that I was very much interested in your work, and also seeing the projects you did with the Rice House, the El Dorado Ballroom, and later on we met in different places, but also in Documenta.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. When starting something like Project Row Houses, I mean, a lot of people got a lot out of it, right? And so that's really great to hear. But the main thing for me was I was getting so much out of it because I was making relationships with people that I would never, have otherwise, right? People from, all the way down to the community level, some people basically homeless, all the way to national, international artists, people that were on boards of big institutions and that kind of stuff. So I gained, it was a lot. I mean, I gained a lot from that project. But one of the things that people often ask me is like, where did I get the energy? I mean, the mindset of doing this kind of social collaborative kind of thing. And, a lot of it, I kind of have to go back to childhood, growing up with 11 siblings and, I mean, we were a community in ourselves, this whole thing, and I was a middle child, so always trying to do stuff. But I wonder about you in the sense that, like, you've taken, I mean, when you had that experience and you committed yourself to it, you've continued to develop, that way of working in ways that is really amazing. I mean, the soap stuff, it's like, you're getting into industry, which is really amazing. And, but I'm curious about if your, kind of your childhood family experience of growing up had any influence, because I think a lot of times what we find is that there's so much of us developed early, and we just kind of take that and parcel it out in our lives in different ways as we continue to grow.
Yeah, well, with my family, we are 4 kids. I'm more or less in the middle. So my sister really does not enjoy doing anything to do with cooking, cleaning, taking care of anything with the house. Everybody can starve, and she will starve with you too. But she will not enter that kitchen. But the interesting thing was that my mother taught us how to cook and do things already and take care of the house and all that. And the kind of education we had with schools was you would learn how to take care, in your school you had home economics and all this kind of stuff. And so I would take care of all these things and, not only take care of the house, but take care of all the fights, all the things that are going on. So I ended up being someone that is very much thinking about how others are feeling, doing, and also making sure that things are comfortable for them. But on an artistic level, I think it's more or less, it's been the experience and also being through different worlds and being in different art spaces in different parts of the world, realizing that not all places have these spaces in which expressions can take place and creative expressions can take place. And then what do you do when you're in a place, for example, when I go to Uyo, where I come from, I don't see any art spaces, or if there's a museum, it's kind of like with old things that have stayed there with dust on it. And so you wonder, like, how can you work in a place like this? If, for example, I decide to live and go back to Uyo and stay there, how do I continue working? How do you then create a space that allows for that creative energy to grow? And so that were things that I was thinking of over time, like, you're in these places and it's a privilege and you take this for granted. But in other places, there are other things that it offers, and how do you work with that thing that it's offering? Not to recreate the same thing, but to create something that allows for it to be generative for many people, and for, even if it's an economic generative thing, or it's an artistic, or it's social, or it's, land farm. So there are many ways of thinking of that economy and that regenerative practice, which is not only within the artistic, but the artistic allows it to take form. And I think that was something that I enjoyed seeing, especially when you would have the El Dorado Ballroom. And I think, was it every Friday or so, or every...
Yeah, we used to do it on Friday nights.
Yeah, you would have people coming from the community to just come and dance and be together and just spend a moment together. But one of the things that really struck me was also the rice house that you made. And I think when I came in 2002, you had just finished that project with Rem Koolhaas. And it was really thinking about the architecture and how architecture affects the way that you live. So the project row houses was made at a time where you just had a box, you would hear everybody's noise, and you were explaining all this to me. Yeah. So I was curious on how you arrived on this idea of the rice house and what that changed in relation to the classic row houses.
Yeah. You know, that was just kind of doing the restoration of the old houses put me in the mindset of or desire to want to know more about architecture, and also the pressure of gentrification and realizing that if we were going to exist in the future, that we had to do things that would kind of complement what we were already doing. And so that gained the relationship with Rice University, and also working on that project with Rem Koolhaas, and just being in that kind of environment of Rem, which has a crazy studio at the time, and also, and just kind of learning from him about for somebody like me, I was intimidated by high art architecture, but and then watching Rem come to those meetings and looking at his model and going in with a hacksaw and like sawing it in half, watching, and just, because he always just talked about how it's not precious stuff, it's about how do you want to build a space for people to be in and that kind of stuff, and that's that's the kind of stuff that I was interested in, and so trying to understand architecture, and I still have a muddled sense of what it is and how it works and how it functions and stuff, and but what's on the and that's indicative to how I work and how I am. I'm one that's, I always see myself as an amateur at almost everything that I do, because I don't have that mindset to focus and perfect things. And then, but I've watched you just from the time when you were at Project Row Houses and spending time. I used to love to hear you talk about your sister and how she's told that story many times about her sister, like not wanting any kind of domestic stuff.
No way.
But what I got from it though also was that you being kind of the opposite, that you got that stuff from your mother and you figured out, and this woman can cook. Do you still cook?
I do.
You said because she can cook.
When I came to Dallas here, I decided that I need to get a place where I cook. So I've been cooking. I wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I'll have my meetings in Europe at 3 o'clock in the morning, and then by 5, 6, I'm cooking.
So now, see, that's why Wim came this time, because he needed some cooking.
He needed some food.
No, but that kind of, but it's almost like I've almost thought of your cooking as like kind of an art form. I mean, because you were very serious about cooking and making, and then now, like watching you over the years and seeing your work evolve and seeing how you work with material. It reminds me of what I remember you thinking about you in terms of cooking, the kind of thoughtfulness, the kind of care, the kind of knowledge that you bring to it, and it's just pretty amazing to see that.
I'm interested in materials in so many different ways, but I don't feel like you say, having the master of that. But I'm curious, I'll come in and say, oh, what's this? And with that, there are many stories that come up, and those stories sometimes meet mine. And so you're thinking of how the oil will mix with the liquid that is in there, and at one point in time, the oil and the liquid almost kind of blends together. Or you're thinking about how this material became from, let's say, a silicate, a solid form, into gas. Like, how does that happen? or how it becomes from solid into liquid, and that place in between where you see the process happening. And so sometimes with the work, you're really thinking of that little space in which that transformation is happening, in which then it opens up many worlds and an expansion of worlds that opens up many other places that you enter into. So a lot of times I enter into the work not knowing, and I really like that idea. You know, like one of the works I did in Sao Paulo, I decided I'm not going to read anything about Sao Paulo. I've been invited to the Sao Paulo Biennale, but what I'm going to do is just to, I found a title, Landversation, and look for people that have conversations with land in a very intentional way. So you would have someone that is really, like I said, a homeless person. What is that? How does that person relate to that space? Because you have to find a place, I'm always wondering, you have to find a place to eat, water, to shower, a place to hide from the sun. How do you decide within the spaces what to do? And so, you know, you arrive in a place and you meet people that are working in an invisible way with people that are living on the land. And there's a very deep relationship to how that land is shaping you. Or you talk about landless people, or geologists, or someone that talks to trees. And so it starts with that kind of inquiry. And so now when I go to Sao Paulo, it feels like it's my second home, because I can arrive in Villa Madalena and I'm like, oh, that park, and that park has purple clay underneath the ground, because they showed me, and that clay, you dig it out and you see where water is flowing. So you know the history of that place through the eyes of the people that are working there, through the kind of storytelling, the physicality of the space. And through that, you understand how material is shifting, transforming, is buried, is discussed, is covered, is obscured. And so it's really interesting to see where people hide things and don't want to share, and see what they share with you. And as you get closer, they show you deeper things and other places. And I remember, for example, when we saw again in Dakar, right? Yeah, we have to go to Senegal now. That was and in Dakar, and just watching you go through the space, and just seeing how, I mean, the program was the program, but you arrived and all of a sudden you had people you were playing basketball with. Even though you don't speak French, but you kind of just entered that space through a completely different approach than what I was imagining you would do. Like you go running, then you come back and tell me the story. Oh, I met this guy, we're going to play basketball. And then before you knew it, if you had stayed longer, you would have been part of that community totally. So for me, it's always, one of the questions I ask is, how do you navigate? I mean, you go through different places, but how do you find the way of engaging with those different places, even though it's a different culture, different language, but you seem to have a kind of seamless way of and fluidity of entering through places. How do you?
You know, it's interesting because what the audience is seeing is two people that have like very similar desires and things that we do, but we have different skill sets in how we do them. You know, I mean, you know, you have this great ability to access people through their work and what they're doing, and mine is completely social. You know, I kind of like get, you know, I mean, I get like, you know, so for me, I end up like, like you said, finding, you know, this kid who was really a great basketball player. I mean, in Dakar, that was really, you know, or being in Athens when, you know, we were for Documenta. You know, my first thing was walking down the street and we're trying to meet people and so on and so forth. But I saw a group of men huddled around together, and I looked over and they were playing dominoes. And then, you know, they weren't speaking a language that I understood, and they were playing slightly different than we play in Texas. And but after watching for a little while, you know, I got up the nerve and raised my hand and said, "Let me play." And they kind of looked at me like I was crazy. And next thing I was in playing, and out of that game came still a lifelong friendship with an Albanian who basically said because at that time what they were calling the fascist party, the Golden Dawn, was smashing buildings and stuff in Athens. And people were telling me like, oh, they're gonna like, if you start a project in this area, it's gonna get, the Golden Dawn is gonna destroy it, whatever. But this guy Mario, he was like, don't worry, we'll take care of it. And his Albanian group, they moved their domino game to Victoria Square project, and we never had a problem. So, but it was like that kind of way of, just kind of trying to, I try to just meeting people on these social kind of situations. I find myself like, if I'm talking to people about their work and their expertise, I drift off. Like you're talking about the soil, I'll find myself drifting off, but you go in deeper. See, but you get the same. You build that relationship.
I think you have a different way of like coming. You go through the side. You don't go like this. You're like, oh, I see that you do this, and then you start doing it, and then you go in, and I'm like, oh, you're good at that. Okay, how are we going to do this?
You go in, but but we're doing the same thing, right? We're accessing people, and we're building relationships that allow us to do the work that we want to do, and that's But speaking of that, speaking of documented, though, the soap project has become really interesting for me, related to another project that I've been working on for, I don't know, since 2020, I guess, called the Black Wall Street Journey.
Oh, yes, we talked about that. Yeah.
Which, and just briefly, I'll just say it's just about this idea that for African Americans in general, whenever we think about African Americans from a financial standpoint, it's always from a deficit standpoint. Well, not just financial, but in every category. If you talk about health, there's a deficit. There's all the things that you want to be at the high end of the score, black people at the bottom, and all the things that you want to be at the low end, and black people at the top, kind of thing. But so working on this project in Tulsa gave me the opportunity to start thinking about the financial aspects.
Yes.
And the thing is that it's so interesting how there's just no data, no information about the interesting kinds of things that black people are doing. I mean, there is a gap, but there are great things going on. And I think it's the great things that are going on that's more inspirational for people, and people can build on, as opposed to the negative stuff.
Yeah.
And the one thing that I've been finding, though, is all these incredible kind of entrepreneurial, industrial kinds of things. And when you started the project in Documentum, I was like, oh my God, this, from an art side, is exactly what I'm trying to get at with this notion of the capacity of black people to participate kind of on an entrepreneurial level, as any other group.
Yeah, I think that was one of the questions I was asking myself in relation to, many people can start many projects. We can all start with a little thing. We can have dreams, and I think you're born into this world, and as you're born, you start with also having dreams. You see things that you desire, people that you want to associate with, things that you want to do. And as time goes on, depending on the trajectory you take, you might be able to start with that dream. But for me, it was also thinking about how do you sustain that? And the Documenta project is not actually the soap, but is a way of thinking about support systems, and also thinking through architecture as a way of being the kind of foundation to think about the support system. So one of the architectural structures that was so important to my way of thinking was the Musgum architecture in Cameroon, where it's houses in a voot-like situation, so this kind of dome, and it's a circular kind of structure with walls. So you have a dome where maybe the husband lives, where the wives live, the kids. But in the middle of all that, and they're protected by this wall connected to the dome, in the middle of all that, you would have the brain, the place where people converse, where people talk, but you would also have the kitchen. And then you would have the tree, which keeps you out of the shade and the sun. And I was interested in that because at first I was looking at neoclassic architecture as a way of thinking. But when Brexit happened, I was like, uh-oh, because of the pillars that hold the building. So once one pillar breaks, everything is like wobbly. And so that thought of using that as my way of thinking for my work, for Documenta, did not work because the support system is actually fragile. But if you're thinking of this dome-like, it's one entity connected by a chain or a wall. If that is destroyed, you can actually decide to extend it like a cell. And so you have the possibility to rethink the project each time. And part of it can fall, but not the core. And so that allows me to think of the project as a way that there is never a failure, there's only a change. And at the same time, that the notion of a support system means that you're constantly looking at ways in which, if this becomes a smaller entity, you can still take care of it. You can find the kind of energy or kind of people that would be able to keep that alive, and you can grow it at each time. And so for me, that soap was just a kind of alibi, but also the channel through which the finance can happen. And once you have the core and everything, you can now build on it with different cells. Which is a kind of nice way to.
Can you talk a little bit more about this idea? I love this idea about like not, positioning the project so you can think about it not in terms of failure but change.
Yes.
And I mean, that's a very interesting, idea that I have to deal with all the time in terms of, doing work and trying to figure out, whether something is working or not. And there are many different ways that people, ways that people look critically at things, and or different ways that people can, find meaning in it. I mean, for instance, like with Project Row Houses, there was an article some years ago, I can't remember how long ago, but this guy, Ben Davis in New York, he wrote an article called The Critique of Social Practice, and he used Project Row Houses as the example of it. He didn't call it a failed project, but he called the whole idea of social practice a failed practice, basically. In that it never delivered, it doesn't deliver at the level that one would think that is promoted to deliver. Anyway, but it was kind of a weird critique, but it was interesting to me though, this notion though about like, so how do I determine if something is actually a failure and just step away from it, or find it in a way that it still has value and it's just changing and shifting?
Yeah, I think there are many ways of having the quantitative and the qualitative. So for me, it's really thinking about the impact that it has on one or two people's lives. And that impact is a ripple effect. So that ripple effect is not, you cannot count what it is doing. You cannot see it in the present. You're actually investing in futures. So you're not thinking of things like, oh, now it has to have a result. A little kid that comes into that room, or me as a young artist, then I was 25 when I came to the Project Row Houses, completely shifted the way I thought about art and what I thought about sculpture, and that impact has impacted me in ways that now there is this other project, and I hope that this other project will impact other people. So we're not working in the sense of thinking of things in a way that is, you see it today, but we're thinking of it in ways that is impacting one by one things. So that's one way of looking at it. And failure is, I never believed in failure. My mother always said, you don't fail. It doesn't exist. It's just something in the thought process where you yourself have set a standard to things, and you have been very focused on that standard. And when you do not arrive at that standard, you think that everything has fallen apart. But if you actually look at the process to get to that standard that you're trying to get to, each part you have moved up, you have gone down a bit, there's a kind of wave, and then you're seeing that maybe this is actually, that standard you're setting might not be the best option, and everything that you've worked for is, you have to also listen to the materials. You also have to listen to the weather. You have to listen to so many things. What about everything? To understand that you might be pushing towards a direction that for the future, it can break down a lot of things. But at this moment, it looks quite great. And maybe all the other elements are you're working against all the other elements which don't allow you to get to that point. So for me, it's very interesting to really think about how to work and how do you want to work that has an impact on many other life forms, on the people you work with, the kinds of labor, and the distribution of a certain economy, and that reparation as you're working, and the design of that, to be able to say at the end of the day, even if I do not get to that, but the journey I have taken hasn't left an impact of detritus and of ruin and of traumas.
Yeah.
And that for me, it's like one of the most important thing than the goal itself of reaching a certain point in which the society can say, oh my God, you arrived. Yeah. And so Carve to Flow as a project, the core of its thinking is that architecture, as I talked about, which allows for it to, if the space in Athens, the Quaibom space in Athens, we cannot afford it in a certain way, we will be able to afford it in a different way. Yeah. And we can afford it with allies.
Yeah. It's so funny you say that, because that's what you're saying there is kind of like, that's 20th century thinking. Because people don't think that way any longer. I was just talking to Benito Herta here just outside before this, and we were talking, we knew each other from Houston years back, and we talked about how great it was in Houston because, if you had this kind of wildcat energy, you could do almost anything, whatever. And nowadays, everybody just thinks they have to have funding for something right away, but there are many different ways to figure things out and to get things done, which is, that's kind of lost a little bit.
Yeah, but I think also, I don't know, because there are many ways of funding and many ways of thinking and doing, and but could it be that maybe a certain kind of imaginative, or the way the world has been structured, or the way we are looking at the world today, the dispossession in a certain way, which comes with, many things now we rent. Yeah. Many things you want to work with a software, you're renting the software before you could own it.
Yeah.
Before you could. So I think there are different ways of that. The way we are reacting and feeling with the world is so different than how it was in the 20th century. The capacity to think that I can do this. I think also that relation to disillusion somehow.
Yeah.
But the world is not getting easier. We're also having a lot more crises with climate, with all kinds of things, and a lot of uncertainty. Certain things feel certain, but a lot of things feel uncertain. Yeah. And we didn't have the same kind of, politics, or the same kind of, the world has really, really changed. And the fear, the uncertainty is really palpable. And to start anything is also, you wonder if it will last.
Yeah.
if the weather will not wash it away, if you will not get flooded, if this, like there are many thoughts that come into place. So once that you have all those things having a weight in your thinking space that occupy a certain type of your part of your brain, I think you also wonder why.
Yeah.
Why should I do this?
Yeah.
What's the use?
Yeah. The one thing that has not changed, and I think that it's really a benefit to artists, is that creativity is. You remember Jesse Lott?
Oh yeah, I remember Jesse.
My mentor who passed away a few years ago. I mean, his thing was always like, the only thing that we have in abundance is creativity. It's just an abundance out there, and so for us to just kind of, figure out, it's a great time for artists, for people to really invest themselves in being artists and supporting artists and that kind of stuff, because that's where a lot of that, we'll find a lot more comfort, I guess, in some of these challenges that you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, but at the same time, I'm also thinking about like the creative process and how that creative process, the way it's seen in many places, is also linked to the economy of making and the possibility to have materials, studio, like these other things that are so real and tangible. But at the same time, I feel that since also in the art world and in the art economy that you have many possibilities of making, which doesn't necessarily need a certain way of making too. And so that means you could be a poet and still be in the art thing. You could work on many other materials and other things that do not demand maybe a huge, how do you say, a huge investment to do them. They could be collaborations, community, groups of people coming together to decide, okay, this is the way we are going to work. So there are many possibilities and many options in which you do not have to carry the weight alone. And that notion of like the individual artist can be exploded in a way that allows for a group of people to do things, work with each other, help each other, and nourish each other. So I think that, and I think maybe the definition of thinking of a social practice is a bit more different today, or the social sculpture, which might not necessarily mean having maybe a place or property, but it could be a think tank, it could be many other ways of still coming together to do things that actually affects the way that community can shift and change. So for me, it's interesting to be able to walk through these different ranges and to think through them, how we can actually continue working when certain things are not at play, or when certain things do not exist anymore.
I could stay on that subject of failure forever, so I'm going to get off of that. That's what I was thinking, because I deal with it a lot, and I've been particularly dealing with it since leaving Project Warehouses in 2018 and thinking about what's the value and that kind of stuff. But I'm going to ask you another question though, like to shift from that though. It's like, so we've known each other over 20 years. 23. In your trajectory in that time, what has been one of the most surprising things for you that has happened in your career, that outside of that moment of being at Project Warehouses, what are other moments that you found that were really impactful in terms of how you make your work now? Wake up.
I feel like I'm locked in a trying to oh God. I think going to Brazil and just realizing, being in Brazil.
That was in 20...
That was in different times. I went in 2003 to Belo Horizonte, and then I went in 2012. And just, one of the things that allowed me to think of how things are connected in ways that I did not imagine. So, you know, coming from Nigeria, we have the red soil, we have the red earth, you have some of the trees that get colored by this earth. And then I go to Belo Horizonte, and I'm like, oh my God, it felt like I was home. Like, there was a crazy feeling of entering into Belo Horizonte, the heat, the humidity, exactly the same. And then just the people were different, and they were speaking like, so sometimes I will stumble on someone and it feels like I know, this face looks like someone I know. And then I'll speak in Ibibio, and like, oh no, this person does not speak Ibibio. I don't know, so I have to recalibrate myself. And just seeing the food, like, you know, you have the farofa, and then we have the gari, then you have the beans, then you have the, and then visiting Ouro Preto, and you know, in the Yoruba land, you would have the grounds that are aligned in the same way the pebbles are because of the Brazilian, Yoruba Brazilians that came back from Brazil end of 19th century into the 20th century, building houses that you would see the same kind of architecture. So all of a sudden, that was the first time something clicked and went like, it's making sense. Because we learn, you know, even in school, we learn like as if we're in an isolated place, and that every other place is different and too far off from who you are. And it was the first time I started thinking around that interconnectedness of things, and how this places, there is an invisible thread that connects us. And some gestures are repeated again and again at different places, just through the movements of people and goods. So that, I think, has been a very impactful and important way in which it has affected my work. And I know studying in Ife in Nigeria, I had an amazing, incredible professor who died some time back, Professor Abufolari. And he was the one, he never taught in classes. He would take you out on the street, and then we'll be scratching the earth, and then, okay, we'll be scratching the earth, and then all of a sudden he would explain why that exists. He would connect it to this and that and explain everything. So entering Brazil, I already had a platform like, oh, that, it's not yours, it's ours too. And then the conversations you're having with people, you start connecting and binding all those things together. Wow. So I think that's one of the, most impactful, one of the impactful moments.
Yeah, I mean, I was just curious, you know, because, you know, over time we just build these life experiences, you know, and they all have like different, you know, impacts and stuff. One of the things, though, that nobody gave us a time limit up here, so no idea, you know, so we don't. So you know, and Alto's already. It said that, you know, she did the performance. You talked for 9 hours.
Yeah,
you know,
that is not difficult. And also when we have conversations, remember we
just go.
Yeah, the first time we came to Houston, we were talking till late in the morning, like just talking and talking and talking. So I know that we can both talk. Yeah. And we can go to different places and talk about this and that and that. So just be warned, it can go on for hours. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. But okay. Jet said we 5 more minutes. Okay. Yeah. All right. So we got.
But what are you working on?
I think you got to realize that, you know.
Yeah.
No, I mean, just what am I working on?
Yes.
Paintings. Which is kind of a weird thing.
You ran away from it at the beginning, because you used to paint at the beginning.
Yeah.
And then I remember when we met you and said, oh, I had to like run away from that.
Yeah, ran away from it.
It's a full circle.
Yeah, I ran away from it and it came back. You know, it came back in a weird way, though. It came back in a more formal sense.
Yes.
You know, I mean, it's much. I remember when we were in Dakar and I showed you these drawings I would do. That was very good. Thank you for that. You were very encouraging to me.
Oh, I was?
Because at that point I was kind of doodling.
Yes, I know.
I was doodling. But you looked at it and you said, oh, this is quite complex. And you said something like that, you know,
yes.
And you said, and I was like, you know, oh, complex. Okay, I'll take that.
Yeah, because
I'll go with that.
Yeah, you said to me that I remember when we talked during COVID, when we spoke, Was it on your birthday? No. And then we were saying, oh, I'm like, what are you doing? It's like, oh, I'm in the studio painting. I was like, what? You ran away from that? Yeah, but there's nothing else to do. And so you were making, and then when we saw in Dakar, you showed me the work. And then I remember the games you used to play, the domino games, and just also just thinking of landscape, neighborhoods, the way of like thinking of architecture, thinking of divisions of land. And so there were many things I could see in the work that opened up another way in which it complements all the social endeavors and practices that you do. Yeah. So it doesn't feel like something out of. Yeah. It's just something that now this is what you're focusing on.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. But as we close, though, I really would like for folks here to get a sense of what it was like for you building this collaboration that you built here to make the work, this beautiful work that's in the space there.
Yeah.
And I have to say, you know, it was so great to be in a place in an exhibition where it's not required, but it's accepted if you just get on the floor and sniff around. I was like, that is so Otto.
Yeah, because before then I was under the ground. Now I want people to go down on the ground. Yeah. You know, I also did a master's in performance, but you know, that's a master's, but all my life you're in performance anyway. You're performing different characters, different possibilities of being. But when I'm thinking of an exhibition, I remember the first time I came here, I only had a day to be in Dallas in, I think, January 27th, 2024. And I saw the space, and I had imagined the Nasher Center differently. So I came in, I was like, oh my God, it's this, there are all these rooms. And then I looked at the colors of the wall. I was rubbing the stone, and most times I like touching to feel the temperature of a wall, to feel the temperature of the floor, and the light that comes in. And so I liked the stone of the wall. I liked different things, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so the conversation has been going on with Jed and with Jill and with Sydney and like, what do you want to do, Otobong? And 1 month it will be this, I want to do this. And then they were like, oh, we'll look for someone to help you with that. And then the next month it will be, no, I think I want to do that. And it's been going on like this because, you know, there are different kinds of restrictions in relation to spaces. And for example, you know, working with MoMA, it has its own complete restrictions. So you're working with restrictions, and working with what things offer, and you have to put your ideas into the spaces. Either you break through it and you are allowed to or not, or either you kind of like find your own self within this possibilities and restrictions. And so with that, it was a big struggle to know what I really wanted to do especially after doing the project in MoMA, which took my life for a while. And then it was a struggle to know why and how and for what and for whom. And after a while, I settled with something that I was excited about. And I decided that none of the works will be shipped from Europe. I already had the glass pieces in New York, but everything will be made here. And I was also excited to understand a bit more about the place, about the materials, and with that, to be able to construct this work that not only is it a sculptural work, but goes beyond just the form, but enters into other communities in a different way, but also enters into the body through smell to shift our visual understanding of things. So I wanted a wider range that incorporates different parts of my practices without it being so, that there's still openness to being with the work and understanding the work. But one of the most amazing things is that, and which I appreciate the most, was that the patience, because I think even in January, the Nasher, you had no idea what I wanted to do. Right? We knew about the soap, so that was something we were working on. But everything else was like, Jed would be like, call me, I was in Nigeria, and I'm like, oh, I'm in the farm, I'm running after the goats. I haven't got time. And then we would be like, okay, I think I have this idea, maybe that, maybe. But at the end of the day, they trusted me enough and also patient enough and say, okay, we'll see when you come. And when I arrived, there's some things that were already brought in. And also to give the people to be able to work with and to be able to make the work. So I'm very honored. I'm even at awe at the same time looking at the work. I'm saying, God, we made it, you know? But it's really touched me because it's opened up another way of me to look at the work. It's not something I've done before in this way. And so I've learned a lot from it, and it's also strengthened my belief that it's possible to be able to make things and to, even though it's under time pressure, time cooker, but you can actually make something in other spaces that you've hardly been to or know, and you're meeting people through that work, which is incredible. Yeah. So,
wow.
yeah. I don't know what else to say about it. I mean,
Well, there's plenty more to talk about.
Yeah, I know.
But we'll save that for other situations.
Totally,
So we'll release the audience
Yes.
that they want to go with.
Yeah.
But yeah, this was great.
No,
I mean,
it was.
it's so. I'm thankful for the Nasher for selecting you. And
I have one question before it's been running in my mind. The street name that was renamed in Castle, remember there was a street you wanted to give that name?
Oh, yeah.
What happened to that? Is it still Castle? Did it still have the name on that street?
Oh,
do you know?
Lord. Yeah, that was one of my projects that could be talked about in the context of failure. No, okay, so just
I'm
quickly,
curious,
I'll just quickly tell, okay, so part of the Documenta experience was that we were supposed to do things in two places, in Athens and in Kassel.
Yeah.
I spent all of the financial resources they gave me in Athens and all of my energy in Athens, so I had nothing for Kassel. But so then I had to pull from that thing of that creativity you talk about.
Yeah.
And I had been meeting with a group there. I met with a group there in Kassel once who was trying to rename the main street that runs through Kassel after a young Turkish man who had been killed by a neo-Nazi group. And they had been trying for years to do it. And unsuccessful, you know, they had problems. But one day I heard somebody mention that, not only that, what I also tried to do is try to broaden the issue because the street was the main thing. The mayor didn't want to deal with that issue and nobody else wanted to deal with it. But we'd start talking about naming in the entire city because there were bridges named after people that were in the Nazi party and all kinds of stuff that was happening. So we said we could just do a whole renaming things in different places. And you know, and they were all excited about it, but we had no resources. But somebody said, you know, Documenta produced close to 1 million maps, you know, for Documenta. And I said, well, if we can't change the name on the street, we can change it on the map. So I proposed that, and Adam, who was the director, really liked it, and he said, but let's not tell anybody. You know, and so we were fine.
Yeah.
And I talked to the designers, and the maps were black and white, and we were going to do the street in red and have it formally known, change the name. I think his name was Halat. I can't remember the last name. But then, you know, formally known as the street. And we had the bridge that was changed on the map and all these different things, right? And we got closer to printing time. And the designers said, you know, we need to talk to you about the map. And I was like, okay. And they said, well, we can't do 2 colors. And I thought, okay, well, that makes sense that you can. I said, but that's okay. Let's just make it like, make it thick and big and hash marks in it or something like that, whatever. And they sent it back to me in like, if you had a document that was 12 point, you know, on the thing, the font was 12 point, they sent it back and it was like 12.3, you know.
Oh, yeah,
you couldn't
so
see the change, you know, because it was like really, and then it was like, and then I realized like somehow
they didn't want to do
it had gotten to them and then they didn't want to do it. However, if anybody went to Documenta 17 in Castle, on the map, it's changed, but it was so small it didn't quite
have that impact. Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, that's the document.
Yeah, sorry, that question has been on my mind forever. And I had to do it publicly. Okay.
Okay.
Right. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you all. Thank you.